Hello and welcome to the Policy Bazaar show. I'm Chaiti Narula. This is your weekly pit stop for learning more about insurance with the help of experts. Over the last few years, there's been a whole host of discussion around pre-existing conditions, and even insurers have their own set of rules and guidelines for covering pre-existing ailments. However, to clear the confusion, the regulator, IRDAI, stepped in recently, issued a standard definition for pre-existing conditions, which the entire insurance ecosystem needs to strictly adhere to. So our subject for today's discussion: now avail day one coverage for your pre-existing ailments. Joining me to discuss this, we've got Sarbvir Singh, the CEO at policybazaar.com. Sarbvir has over 20 glorious years of global experience in corporate leadership roles, in venture capital, in public markets investing. Sarbvir also firmly believes that employees are like family members and humans first, and that's the way he conducts his operation as well. During the current times of social distancing, he feels bringing meaning to the lives of employees, regular communication with them, and decluttering the focus areas at work should be the key areas when it comes to leading a team. Pleasure having you always, and here again, Sarbvir.
Thank you, Chaiti. Good to be here again.
And of course, joining Sarbvir, we've got Mayank Bathwal, the CEO of Aditya Birla Health Insurance. Mayank brings with him years and years of leadership and corporate board experience across insurance, finance, manufacturing, energy, power, digital financial products, and financial services sectors. He puts strong emphasis on growth, on cross-disciplinary teams of sales, operations, risk assessment, compliance, digital and business intelligence. Mayank also lends his fabulous expertise as a member of CII subcommittee on accessibility, health insurance, FICCI committee as well on health insurance, and IAMAI health tech committee. Welcome to the show again, Mayank. How fabulous it is to have you with us.
My pleasure, Chaiti. Good to be there.
All right, let's begin. My first question is to Sarbvir. Sarbvir, could you please elaborate for our viewers what exactly is the definition of a pre-existing disease as a category, and what conditions can be classified or will be classified as pre-existing ailments from here on?
Sure, Chaiti. I'd first also just like to explain that there is a common, misconception amongst consumers that if you have a pre-existing disease, then, getting health insurance is difficult. So nothing can be further from the truth. And of course, on this show, we'll talk more about it. But even if you have a pre-existing condition, you can easily get health insurance. Now, let me come to the question that you asked. So IRDA in February 20 has actually very clearly clarified what is a pre-existing disease and how is it to be measured. So very simply, any disease which has been either diagnosed, which has either been recognized or treated by a qualified doctor within a period of 48 months before the policy is issued is called a pre-existing disease. So now there is no ambiguity about it. So there must be a diagnosis, or there may have been a treatment, or advice may have been given about the disease. That is called a pre-existing disease.
We've got Mayank also on this broadcast. Mayank, when we talk about pre-existing conditions under a health insurance policy, the first thing that comes to our minds is the waiting period. What we understand is that most insurers cover the pre-existing ailments after the customer has served a mandatory waiting period of 2 to 4 years specific to the illnesses. Any specific reason why there is such a waiting period on pre-existing ailments under a health insurance policy?
I'd say it's a good question, Chaiti. Insurance, as you know, is ultimately about coverage of large, number of individuals, so that you can broaden the base and then provide, in some way, subsidy by younger consumers to the people who are senior, and therefore so that the price is not significantly different. But having said that, when people have existing conditions, the chances of their claims and therefore the cost of premium increasing becomes higher. Now, if suppose you give the same pricing to people who have some pre-existing conditions versus people who are completely healthy, then in a way you might be over penalizing or compensating for people who actually don't have any condition, and they may stay away from insurance. So typically what we do is that we try and put some initial restrictions for people who already have a condition, so that the pricing can be in such a range that it makes sense for both them and people who are healthy as well. In addition, there are a couple of other issues. One is that let's say someone has a condition of cataract. Now that's a completely discretionary treatment, right? I mean, you may decide to go for a treatment. Now, if someone who has a cataract then goes and buys health insurance, this is called something called, that there is an anti-selection, because someone who needs insurance is taking insurance at that stage, and ultimately the price versus the cost of treatment may not really turn out to be what makes sense for the business. So typically these are the kind of restrictions that are put in the beginning, and one can always move to a situation where there is no waiting period, but that then you need to have a very, very large mass of consumers getting covered in the product.
Sure. So, Mayank, we have started to hear about plans that provide coverage for your pre-existing conditions from day one, with one such plan that has become quite popular being Aditya Birla Health Insurance Active Health Enhance. Can you please elaborate on the plan as to how it works and what does the day one coverage really mean?
So we launched this product about 4 years back, and our realization when talking to customers was they were saying that give us coverage. So suppose let's say someone has a diabetes condition, right? So they say that give me a product with day one coverage. I'm willing to pay slightly higher than what you may charge, if you have the waiting period for me, or if I was a healthy person. And so we felt that why not actually provide these benefits if there are consumers who are willing to pay, versus having a restriction and they're not sure that if a condition arises whether they'll get their treatment costs covered. So we've launched this product. It's been a very, very well accepted by consumers, because consumers did realize that now they can get coverage from day one, and the fact is because they have that condition, they knew that the condition may lead to a treatment requirement or some other health cost at any point of time. So that's why it has been very, very successful. And what we also did is that not only did we say day one coverage for hospitalization, but we also brought in other expenses that, let's say, someone with diabetes needs to incur. Visit to a doctor, going and doing an HbA1c test, and so on and so forth, medicine. And that was much more wholesome.
So, Sarbvir, as an industry expert, how do you see this category of early coverage, say day one or 30 to 90 days waiting period, and will it pick up? To begin with, what was the need to even come up with such plans in the market now? Is there a post-COVID impact we're seeing here, or is there more to it?
So I think the way to think about it is that if you have a pre-existing disease, your concern is always about how long will it take before my disease will be covered. And traditionally, plans have taken 4 years as the waiting period, which as you can imagine is a long time for a consumer to wait. There is a lot of expense that is incurred during these 4 years. So clearly, there is a lot of interest among consumers who have, let's say, diabetes or hypertension to look for plans which provide early start and lower waiting periods. So in that kind of environment, having something which covers certain expenses from day one and then covers hospitalization from about 90 days onwards is a very attractive proposition for consumers. And we are seeing a lot of pickup and demand for these plans. In terms of COVID, I think what COVID has done is, really heightened this whole thing, because as you know, that anyone who has another disease, and if they get COVID, then there tends to be a greater, propensity for it to become a more serious case. So I think consumers who have these diseases are very worried about it, and hence are even more keen to get plans which cover these ailments faster.
All right. So, Sarbvir, on the pricing side now, how would you say that these plans are different compared to the normal health plans? Would these also then be costlier?
So, as Mayank has just explained earlier, that of course there is a bit of a premium that is charged for the fact that you are coming in with a pre-existing disease. So let's say if you have diabetes, we know that there are chances that you will get certain other things, or if you get another disease combined with diabetes, it could become a bigger issue. So these plans do tend to be a little costlier, but like the plan that Aditya Birla has introduced, the premium is quite small, in the range of let's say even 15 to 20%. So I think it overall as a proposition, it becomes quite economical, given the fact that you can get a doctor's consultation, you can get a diagnostic test done, which you would in any case have to do. So I think they are slightly higher priced, but the premium is well worth it if you have these ailments.
Right. My next question, of course, is to Mayank. According to you, Mayank, how important is it to have a health insurance plan that provides you with day one coverage for your pre-existing ailments?
See, I think even if I had a choice, I would say that the entire industry should move to, a situation where all these conditions are covered from day one. But that cannot be done only by one player and only in one product. That has to happen across the board. And maybe one day we might reach there because, for example, recently the RDA did ask for many more conditions to be, included in the coverage, right? So what it does to consumers is it gives them that comfort that I don't have to wait. I don't have to go and have this conversation with the customer. Is this covered? Is this not covered? When will it the waiting period end? Because that has been one of the key concerns that we've always heard from consumers who sometimes may not understand that which conditions are excluded and which are not, or where there's a waiting period. So I think it brings in more clarity, simplicity, and consumers are much more happier when they have these benefits.
Absolutely. Time now for a very short commercial break here on India Today. Stay tuned. We're going to be right back on the Policy Bazaar show. Welcome back to the Policy Bazaar show. We're discussing now avail day one coverage for your pre-existing ailments. Here with Sadhbir Singh from policybazaar.com and Mayank Patwal of Aditya Birla Health Insurance. Continuing where we left off with our discussion, I'd like to ask this to both our guests. First to you, Sadhbir. Often people have been observed procrastinating, applying for health insurance, citing their pre-existing ailments as the primary reason. Is it a common notion that people with pre-existing conditions will not be able to secure health insurance policy? Is that true? And also, what are some of the most common pre-existing conditions reported amongst Indians?
So I think I would like to believe that it's not a common notion, but it's definitely a notion that people, like you said, people want to sort of put off. We all want to put off buying insurance because you pay first and you get the benefit later. So there's a natural tendency to do that. But I think people have understood that even if you have pre-existing diseases, you do get covered. And for those who haven't, I've been using this show, I would just like to make it very clear that if you have a pre-existing disease, there are plans which cover those. And it's totally something that you should not use as an excuse for not buying health insurance. In terms of common conditions, what we've seen, about a third of the people who come on our platform looking for health insurance tend to have some kind of pre-existing disease with them. And the most common one is diabetes. About half of the people have diabetes, and about 25 to 30% tend to have some kind of heart-related condition. So I would say these are the two most common ailments. And of course, many there are cases where you could have both or other things together.
Right, Mayank, I'm going to request you to come on this one. We've spoken about how people, usually end up procrastinating while applying for health insurance, citing all these pre-existing ailments as the primary reason. Sadhbir threw light on this particular issue as well. What are some of the most common pre-existing conditions reported amongst Indians and why this procrastination, if you could walk our viewers?
I mean, the procrastination actually is not just for health, but general insurance, as you know. I mean, somehow as Indians, we believe in this whole notion of karma, right? That everything will happen to my neighbor, not to me.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, as COVID showed, that it can happen at any point of time to anyone. So firstly, having health insurance itself is very important. And the younger you take health insurance, the more assured you are that there will never be any restriction on the benefit that you get, right? Because you don't have any pre-existing condition, you are young and healthy, and you end up, therefore getting a very clean policy where every coverage is covered from the just next day onwards. And so my plea to, both people who are young and healthy, please buy now. And my plea to people who have existing conditions, don't worry, folks. Whilst it may have been an issue earlier, today there are products which cover your benefit, conditions from day one. And by the way, there are more, companies coming up with other offerings as well, where even some more acute conditions like cancer, etc., may be covered from day one very soon. So I would say that as people start getting more and more into insurance, we'll be able to put greater benefits into the product as well.
Absolutely. Now, Sadhbir, speaking specifically of this category where one gets an early cover, even with PEDs, there are a few other plans as well, along with the one that we just discussed earlier. If you could just throw some light on these plans for our viewers, for their benefit, and the waiting period in each of these cases.
Sure, absolutely. I think the first point I'd like to make is that given the way the industry is going, even some of the standard plans, if the degree of the ailment is not very severe, then many of the standard plans, and we have a lot of high sum insured plans on our platform, they also cover ailments like diabetes and heart conditions in the basic tier as well. Now, coming to the specific plans, today, of course, we've spoken about Aditya Birla's Active Health. Then there is HDFC Ergo's Energy, which is one of the older plans which has been around, for similar illnesses. Then Star has a couple of plans. One is a Diabetes Safe plan, and then they have a Cardiac Care Gold plan. So these are some other options for consumers who may have these ailments and who could get coverage. In some cases, you can get coverage from day one, and in some cases, you may have to wait a year or so before you can get covered.
All right. Also, can you please throw some light, Sarbvir, on which diseases or say ailments can typically get day one cover here?
Right. So we are talking more of what we call the ABCD diseases. So asthma, BP, which is related to heart conditions. Then you have cholesterol, and then you have diabetes. So as I mentioned, diabetes and heart conditions are the most common, and both of these now have plans where you can get day one cover.
Right. Mayank, coming to you now, to the process, the claims process. Is the procedure any different for these early cover plans? What is the average claim amount that we get to see in this category of early cover?
No, I mean, the claim process is very similar to what you would have in any other product, because the only difference is that the benefit starts getting covered from day one rather than you having the customer having to wait for a certain period. So there's nothing that is different from a customer experience perspective. In fact, because the coverage is from day one, then typically, I would say the case gets faster, because in the other cases there might be some investigation, etc., for potential fraud-based abuse that sometimes tends to happen. In which case the customer might get inconvenience if the case is clean. But in this case, because it's day one coverage, there is no issue at all, and I would say it's much better. In fact, and if you cover other benefits like medical medicine and doctor visits, etc., we are now offering even cashless experience for them also, because digital health is providing an opportunity to provide a complete digital ecosystem there as well.
This brings us to the final question before we wrap up the show. Beginning with you, Sarbvir, what should a customer really keep in mind, with the PEDs, of course, keep in mind while buying a health insurance policy?
Sure, Jay. So, we advocate sort of a three-step approach. One is that if you have a PED, then first you should look at the waiting period. So depending on the severity of your disease, you can decide whether you need early coverage or you can afford to wait. The second thing, which is common across all health insurance plans, is to look at the limitations that the plan may impose on things like whether there's room rent capping, because as we know, room rent capping has an impact not only on the room that you can use, but also impacts the treatment, the cost of treatment that you get. The second thing in the same area is the copay, that whether or not there is a copay. So ideally, you should have plans which don't have copay. And then finally, sublimits. So you want plans which don't have sublimits. So that's step 2. And step 3 is the issuance process, right? So once you've made your payment, now the policy has to get issued. Ideally, you would like to get, those kind of policies which have a telemedical or a non-medical process, where you don't have to go somewhere, to get the medical done, and you can get the policy issued. So I would say that, especially, given COVID and the concern that one has around going anywhere, it's very important to make sure that the policy can be issued smoothly and sitting at home.
All right, Mayank, what's your take on this? What should a customer with PEDs keep in mind while buying a health insurance policy?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sarbvir highlighted the issue very well. I'll just put that, in my own, the way I always suggest to customers, simply ask this question to the person who's selling you this benefit. What is it that will be covered in my policy if I were to, unfortunately be in a condition where I have to put a claim for hospitalization or other benefits that are covered? And what is it that will not be covered? So please be clear on what is not getting covered. And that's where typically we find consumer dissonance, when they are not fully aware of what is covered and what's not covered. So just ask them, give me in writing what are the benefits that are not covered. And I think you'll be, much better off than later on in a situation where you might be wondering, I got this, I paid for it, but I'm still not getting covered, or there's a waiting, etc. So be clear as a consumer.
All right, with that, we come to the end of a very insightful discussion. Thank you so much, Sarbvir and Mayank, for joining us today. What a pleasure having you both again on the show. That's all for this week. This is Chaiti Narula signing off. Keep watching the Policy Bazaar Show.